And we are recording. Brilliant, thank you. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. We've just been having the usual technical nightmares that I have whenever I try and do this, and found out I had to delete a load of people. So if the last episodes are on YouTube, then make the most of them, because I don't have hard copies on my hard drive anymore. Today we have an absolutely fantastic guest with a background that the more I read it, the more fascinating it becomes, and just opens up so many questions. Steve Stratton, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Gavin. Great to be here.
So I've got to start with one that's got to be probably the most obvious question, because of the character name in your book. And I went through an absolute nightmare when, because it's almost like choosing names for your children, isn't it? You know, you've got to get it right, and you want to get something that just hits the spot. So tell me a little bit about Lance.
Yeah, so when I started writing a story, and I really hadn't settled on, a primary antagonist name and protagonist, not antagonist, protagonist. But I knew I wanted something that wasn't another, super hard to kill. I thought the Gray Man was very cool, but Mitch Rapp, or like Brad Thor, I just wanted somebody different, who thought a bit different, who would bring a different perspective. And I started looking around, and I was, of course, influenced by Clancy, Louis L'Amour, his book Last of Breed, where a Native American Air Force pilot goes down in Siberia and has to fight his way across. And Jack Carr's has been influenced by that book too. And so I just started looking around and thought, well, what's better than a Native American? Not that I wanted to compete with Jack and cross tomahawks, but have that idea of somebody who thinks differently, is a bit more, maybe not religious, but on the spiritual side, and looks for guidance in different ways. And so I created a really sort of unique family where, as you read in the first book, he's got a stepfather who's Norwegian, and a Native American mom and stuff like that. And so it's a unique setting with his stepbrothers and sisters and stuff like that. So, I really hadn't thought about series, though. That's an important consideration, right, when you're going to write a series. But as it's turned out, it worked out very well. And, I've added a few people here and there, made Ellie his love interest. And it's been a lot of fun. To include, actually, last year, really exploding and blowing out their profile. I did just sort of a 2-pager, kind of like, here he is, height, weight, things like that. Then I found a template for a character profile that's like got a couple hundred questions, and how would they do this, or how would they react to that? And that really helped with the new book that's is on the way in January. So.
Oh wow! I'll have to get a copy of that. So with because I've got so many questions that have just sprung from that. To start with, I'll just say that the whole kind of family tree that you've developed there has probably in itself made the character so much more relatable, because of the amount of people who do have step parents or broken families or mixed families and that kind of thing, because we are living in a generation now where it's more than ever, and not everybody's got a kind of different story. Nobody wants the typical American mom, American dad, or English mom, English dad, kind of 2.4 children and a Labrador. And so, in itself, adds that relatability to your character. And yeah, like kind of where you were talking about, it ongoing to a series, it was very different for me, because I knew when I put my first book out, I knew it was going to be a trilogy from day one. So I'd written things in book 1 which will then get revealed in books 2 and 3, that you realize, that's the significance of it. So for me, I had that in mind. but I know where you're coming from with because I just got a publishing contract for a short story.
Oh, congratulations!
Well, I did. It was three short stories, but originally it was meant to be three separate short stories. So I was like, okay, no problem. Really happy with that. So I did the first one and I sent it off, and they were like, "Yep, this is great. We absolutely love it. Do you know what? We like it that much. We want you to do either side now." I went, "Oh, can't do that," because when I was writing it, like I put this whole situation together that the protagonist had to get out of, which he did. And of course, you've got all the questions of how did they get in that situation in the first place, and blah blah blah, and what's all the backstory. Well, I wasn't bothered about all of that because it was only meant to be a short story. So when they now said, right, okay, we want two more parts of the same one, I was like,
So yeah, that's when the work starts, right?
Yeah. Yep, I can definitely feel your pain there. But yeah, so and how much of like kind of your own yourself goes into your main characters when it comes to kind of what are the similarities and the differences?
Number one similarity is Lance is always looking for his next meal, right? Lance is having some, and Lance, may not drink as much tea as he did when he was stationed in the UK, but he's definitely, it's like coffee and stopping for coffee and that kind of thing, and having conversations around coffee. So yeah, there's certainly a bit of my experience in there, and then also some people I've met along the way who were just really good people or influential in some way that I've written into the stories, like Gus Morgan, who appears in the second book and plays a bigger role in the novella origin story, and then in this fourth book. That's a real amazing, crazy special forces medic person who was just sometimes hard to control, but always interesting to have on your team. And so I've been lucky that way that until I wrote the series I have under contract with Winding Road Stories and a female protagonist, I'd used my 26 years of military experience between active duty and the National Guard and things like that, and then all kinds of people I've met in between, and 70 years of life. So
yep. And I'm curious, do you ever get tempted if there's somebody that you've met that you don't like? Do you ever feel like putting them in a book and killing them off?
Oh, I have.
You have? Well, fair enough. So it's not just me then.
It was delicious. It was wonderful. It was like a good double cream pudding. So
yeah, I gotta admit, so I was tempted. One of my things in my book, one of the things I've decided that I'm gonna keep 100% is always the continuity. So if I mention a website, that website exists. If I mention a secret military base, it's there. Whatever is in there is 100% continuity wise. I decided to keep that. However, every now and again, I do get the devil inside me, and I do want to kind of say, this particular character went to the corner office of in Langley and found his boss kind of having an affair with the office junior, and I think, shall I, shan't I? Is it worth it? And stir the pot a little bit. Do you ever get that kind of cheeky naughtiness inside where you think, I'm going to put something in, or just to shake the tree?
Oh, absolutely. I fought for years to get a certain type of device in the U.S. Army guardrail surveillance aircraft, the ISR, twin engine aircraft. And, they just couldn't get inside the program. So I not only wrote that technology in, I wrote in a analyst seat. There's no analyst in the back of a guardrail, but I wrote in an analyst seat and other things like that. Like, if you'd have just listened to me, we could have done this the right way. So, yeah.
Oh, well. Oh, that's good. I've just spotted as well. Is that a secret lab chair that you're sitting on, is it?
Yeah.
It is. Wow, very, very nice. My brother's just treated himself to one of those, and mine was thrown out of an office. And I was on my way to go. I've just moved into this apartment. I was on my way to go and get some bits and pieces, and it was thrown out. And I'm like, "Yep," and that went in the back of the car.
My wife sits in a chair that is so broken down and so low. She anyway. But she doesn't want to get rid of it. It's her chair, and she's she's finally given up, retired out of her real estate business, but she ran her business, and it's like the chair is like an employee. She doesn't.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing. I was going to get a replacement, but this is so comfortable. I decided to keep it.
Hey, if it works, I alternate between sitting, and then I have a standing desk that I can pull up and work from it, and so. That I'm not, because I don't know about you, but I can sit for hours and hours and write. I get so lost in the writing and having so much fun. And then I get up and my calves are tight, my back is tight, or back is asking what I'm doing. And I have to be careful and sort of switch around with that.
I remember when I first got into this, I got to admit it was a little bit therapeutic for me, because there's a lot of kind of secrets and things inside me that I'd done, and getting it out on paper, even knowing that some of it probably was never going to see the light of day, just felt so great, And I remember the one, because I was actually, it was pen and paper for me when I first started with everything. It was as crazy as it sounds, as old-fashioned as it was, that was the way I operated, and some of it I couldn't even read myself the following day. I was like, "What the hell is that?" It looked like a child had scribbled all over the book, So yes, I can definitely relate to that. I remember on this one occasion, I'd been writing all day, having regular stops for coffee and dinner and that kind of thing. And my wife had been waiting to watch a film, and I said, "Yeah, I'll be with you in a minute. I'll be with you in a minute." And I just kept writing, and eventually she'd given up and she'd gone to bed. And she come down the first time, probably after half an hour. She said, "Are you coming to bed?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be up in a minute." And I carried on writing. Second time, same again. Third time, same again. And I just totally lost track of time, and I carried on writing. And the next thing you know, I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. I thought, "Oh, I better hurry up and finish this off." I thought, because she's going to go nuts if I don't go to bed soon. So I flipped the page. I'm just starting on the second page, and she came in. I said, I know. I said, "I'll be up in a minute." She says, "No, I'm up. It's morning." you missed that window. I'd actually written all through the night.
Nice. I don't. I'm a very morning person. I get up at like 4:30 in the morning here in Colorado, and I love the peace of the morning and writing, and of course, used to standing watch and things like that. I'm not. Occasionally, just if the coffee or the late night, Earl Grey hits me just right, I can edit or write in the evening. But most of the time, it's just all working in the morning. But yeah, that's too funny getting lost in it that.
Yeah. To that extreme. I've never done it before or since, but yeah, that was the first. But it was definitely one that I didn't realize exactly how long I'd been going for. And I remember having this. I'll show you now. This resides next to my desk, and this comes from having a pack of big biro pens. And then as soon as I started to make Morse code as I was writing, as I used to call it Morse code, because it'd just be dots and dashes, and I'd throw it and grab the next one, lid off, and start again.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting. There's since I've gotten to meet and become friends with different authors, it's like they have all these different patterns for writing and stuff like that. One of the more interesting ones is Don Bentley writes for 45 minutes and gets up for 15 and walks around. And then he can go for quite a long time doing that, but that's how he keeps it fresh. And I can imagine that when he gets up to walk around or do some push-ups or something, that his brain is still going and it's still working on, what he just hasn't put on the page yet. But
I've chatted to Don a few times, and I've got to give him his due, even to this day. When before his first book came out, right up until right this second, he has got to be one of the most great and humble men in the world of kind of where he is and social media. If anybody, any of his fans or anybody at all, put something on Twitter or whatever, well, X as it's called now, he instantly. Well, not instantly, but he replies to all of them. He makes a point of replying to all of them, you know, and no matter how big he's grown, what an absolutely fantastic guy. He's been on the show, and just, yeah, nothing but admiration for him. He's never got to the point where he says, I'm too big to talk to the little man anymore. And so massive admiration for him there with that. So,
oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that his technique is very similar to, do they call it the Pomodoro technique, is it? Which is meant to be like 25 minutes and 5 minutes. And
yeah, except I think I remember he said 45 is what he did.
Yeah.
And then he's very disciplined, because I met him one time. I was in Austin just before I retired. I was at this sales kickoff, and it was like one of those icy days in Texas where most people don't know what to do. And it's sort of fun to get up on top of the hotel and watch the craziness. But we met, and he said I was the only other thing other than writing and family he was doing that day, right? Because he needed to keep that discipline to make his deadlines and other things like that. And it was a good lesson. You know, writing my first book, I was disciplined because I was having to do it at 4:30 in the morning, you know, out here in Denver before they woke up on the East Coast. So I got a couple hours every morning to wake up and write, you know, and go back into editing whatever that scribble, like, you know, and my writing, let's just say when I was a young man, English class was interesting. But I, like most classes, I went from A's to D's and then back up to C's because I was bored in school. So I have had a lot of help learning how to not only learn how to write, but also in remembering and coming back to the English language and those stupid things like commas and stuff that. So
yeah, I was. Well, I remember as a child, like attending English class when you just brought back a flood of memories about like English and English lessons and that kind of thing. I just wanted things to be simple. You know, I just wanted a rule that I could stick to. You know, and you'd hear things like I before E except after C, and you go, okay, that's perfect. I know. Except the fact that it isn't. In fact, there's more the other way around than what there is actually. There's something like 16 that applies to that rule, and like 150 or something that doesn't. And all these things. And I'm thinking, why does it all have to be so complicated? Why? And you know, I suppose as a child, I was very logical in the way I thought. Anyway, I remember saying to my mom, "Why'd you put me to bed when I'm wide awake and wake me up when I'm fast asleep? And send me to school." None of this makes sense to me. And I was probably 5, 6 at the time when I asked her that question. So yeah, English. I knew the basics. I knew what I needed to know. Capital at the beginning, full stop at the end, or period, as you guys call it. And it was when it started getting into like subclauses and contractions, and I thought, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know the names of the words? As long as I know how to write and what to write, do I really need all of that? And now I think, looking at a lot of society and autocorrect and many other things, I think it's definitely a fading skill. And I see on social media and all manner of places as these written comments, and I think, ooh, what happened?
Yeah, I'm I don't have Grammarly turned on, that kind of thing for my X's or Instagram, but I take a look at them, make sure at least they're legible, and I'm not saying something where the comma would have made a huge difference, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll be honest. I use Pro Writing Aid and AutoCrit when I write, and they have pointed things out to me and helped me make a better writer. One of my big ones is, I in writing a thriller is repeating, names. And if you're saying Steve said, and Gavin said, and Steve said, and Gavin said, or Gavin asked, and Steve asked, then the poor software goes off the meter, and hangs over to the right and goes, "What are you doing?" But Yeah, so I continue to learn, and that's one of the things I focus on. Is I'm enjoying writing more than ever, and also the learning of writing and different ways to write. So
Oh yeah, I got to admit when I first started, I was very much like that with kind of he said, she said, he said, she said, all the way down, and I thought I've got to mix this up a little bit, and of course you can't go all the way down. He whispered, she exclaimed, they shouted, he yelled, you've got, and they say if you use the word said all the way down, that it's, or as the saying goes in the editing word, said he's dead. You've got to come up with something else. I was like, okay, I can be imaginative, I can be creative. So I started going down the road of like, I'd say it's a wonderful day. Gavin sipped his tea and placed it on the coffee table. Yes, it is. Sally kind of looked out the window and looked back at Gavin, and things like this. So there's like actions tied in with a speech, and I thought, this is brilliant. I'm a genius. And then, when I sent it off to the editor, he says, "You can't do that." I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. Then I thought it was good.
Yeah, action beats, emotional beats. How many times can somebody frown? All that kind of stuff. Yeah. I had an editor recently. In the past year say, he and she said, and whatever, Gavin and Steve, those kind of things disappear. When you start putting in the action beats or the emotional beats, make sure it's for a reason, not just to change it up.
Yeah, that's right? It. Yeah, there's got to be something going on, moving the story forward.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to pull back and look at that and go, oh yeah, that's just, don't need that here, It's like throwing in an exclamation point, instead of saying yelled, things like that. So yeah, lots of good stuff to learn. And it's funny because what I grew up with, what you grew up with, even, is not accepted practice today. So
that's right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, growing up with Clancy, minus like, too much information about the Politburo, inside Russian politics and things like that. Yeah, it's just that's not what editors want to see today, and because it's funny to look back and go, wow, okay, I got all that influence, and now I sort of got to put that aside and make sure I'm writing in a style that editors are accepting today. Not like I'm a big follower of that whole Chicago style book thing, but.
Well, that's exactly what I kind of, my argument with it was when one of my first editors and who I wrote the one particular book that I sent to them, and they said, no, that's not the way publishers want it today. And I said, well, I don't really care about publishers, I care about readers. I said, it's and he said, no, this isn't the writing style. There's this and we went through this kind of, not an argument, but a debate. And I said, well, who decides this? Who decides what's better? Because like you said, you read the likes of Tom Clancy. It was great reading. It was enjoyable. So why is it they've decided now all of a sudden that you can't write like that because people don't want to read it? Who makes that decision? And how do they come to that decision?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's interesting because Andrews and Wilson wrote their submarine story on the 40th anniversary of Hunt for Red October. And it read very much like a Tom Clancy book. And I think it did very, very well, and maybe it's because 40th anniversary and Andrews and Wilson's and,
possibly
great guys, who knows, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand if this is coming from like, multiple hours of extensive market research where, they've split tests and put, people in rooms and said, read these books and then which one's the best. And it might be the same story written in two different particular ways and you got, higher volumes. But I think a lot of the time it's probably not down to the actual reader. It's probably down to the editor saying, "Oh, this is much easier to edit if I just get him to change all the objectives, all the what's it up." And,
There you go again, trying to be logical, do some testing. Oh, I don't know.
It'll get me killed. How do you get on with when you're using things like the software and that kind of thing? I mean, I don't know how much kind of tradecraft you put into your books and that kind of thing, but if you're talking about something like a skiff or things that to me and you will make sense, but to a piece of software that's never heard of a skiff or doesn't understand like the relevance of, say, Seventh Floor or things like that, do you find it kind of starts rejecting it and it creates more work for you?
Well, not really. And you can also train them, right? And then like with autocrit, you can say, okay, I want to analyze this against thrillers, and then pick some folks that work with the company, and their writing and things like that have,
Mhm.
unlike the AI companies, their writing was properly licensed, kind of idea.
Mhm.
So not too bad. I've thrown in a couple of dark blank spaces, like it was redacted, just to see what it would do, and it did like, sort of it started to smoke a little bit because it didn't know
Mm.
what to do with the redacted line of redacted.
Wow. I had,
Someplace that doesn't exist in Morocco, kind of idea,
oh wow.
or Jordan. But yeah, so they're tools, right? And I
Mm.
still hire editor. I use them to help me look for things that are just sort of big things. Um, Autocrit is working, towards being able to analyze a story. I played around with the beta version, and it found a hole where I had said something and never finished it.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and luckily I have great beta readers, and one of them told me I just did the same thing in my fourth book, and I had to go back and fix it. I had this really important thing that happened, and
Ah.
just never addressed it after my asset, who was hiding in a Cuban DGI or
Mhm.
G2, found out that somebody was looking at it. That just never closed it out, and it was rather important to the story. It's like, yeah, it left it
Mm.
on the table. So that's always nice, right?
Yeah.
You've been
Uh,
looking, and when you've looked at a manuscript for so long,
yeah.
and stuff like that kind of stuff disappears.
I might have to try that out. The only problem I'd have with that is I have deliberately put stuff in books one that gets revealed in two and three, in book two that gets revealed in book three, and so it's kind of, it's subtle enough for people to like be aware of it, but not strong enough for people to go, oh well, what happened? We never got the answer to that. So but by the time they get to the next book, they'll go, oh yeah, I remember reading about that, and so it should hopefully lock in without jarring the story too much. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you're doing that on purpose, that kind of thing, and um, then it's going to identify it, but it's just
mm,
it's just something to identify and go, okay, well, that's good. It recognized it, and that's good, but no impact.
yeah.
So not a big
I,
deal.
I've had to use a redaction thing myself as well in book two, which you just reminded me of. That when I was saying everything that I've put in the continuity is 100%. Well, one of the things I did is I put the telephone number to the station chief in the Prague embassy, the CIA station chief in the Prague embassy, and when I checked it out, it was still the same number, and I'm like, oh no, can't put that in. So I actually redacted I think the first 2 or 4 digits might be there, and then I've kind of redacted the rest. So yeah, I thought there's certain things where I don't mind kind of keeping the continuity right, but yeah, so I had two options, and that was to kind of tell him to change the number, which I don't think would have done me any favors, or redact it. So that's what I did, and I did a similar thing with a website as well, but I won't go into that right now. Maybe off the air later.
Yeah.
How do you find yourself with that, with like kind of pre-publication review? Do you have to go through the same kind of system that the likes of CIA do, and one or two others, or are you not subject to that, or where does that fit in with you? Because you've worked for multiple agencies, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so I don't have a signed secrecy agreement with the CIA. But there is a thing called DOPS, or DOD, pre-publication review, and unfortunately, my novella, my last book in June, my origin story for Lance Beowulf, it actually I forgot that I'd never gotten the review back. And then I got a letter from them, sort of a nasty ground thing. By the way, we're not going to spend our time reviewing your book because we see it's published.
Ouch.
And they reviewed the first two books, and relationships between three-letter agencies and certain tier level units in the military, which are all out in the, you know, in the public domain,
Yeah.
but they don't like to make the connection. So to be honest, I just say it. I mean, I couldn't use JSOC and some other terms, and so I created Joint Strike Command. You know,
Oh, okay.
you know, just shorten it up, change it, do things like that. You know, it's funny because Jack and Brad Taylor and other people, you know, it's a very strange place to go. And I've got friends, you know, author friends who, like Tracy Abramson was at the agency, McCluskey, you know, Barry, you know, and I know they go through it. And one of the cool things about there is they sort of get known, and then because Tracy's on like book 50, and so they know that she's going down this path, and she usually does trilogies, and you know, and that she's not talking about these things. And then if something new pops up, you know, they might ask a question, but she's worked with them for so long and stuff, they know she does very clean writing. You know, I imagine they gave a bit more review to McCluskey and or Barry when they, you know, first book out, you know, like
paid a bit more attention because of
paid more attention. Unfortunately, one time at DOD, it took like 13 months. Next time it took 4 months. It's always somebody different. They're not using any software, right? So before I retired, I developed systems where you could use my software to downgrade a TS document to secret. And we would check for dirty words and do all kinds of things. And I'm like, why are you guys using this technology? No,
I suppose that becomes, I suppose if you're using veiled speech or you know, you're kind of alluding to something which, you know, we know can be done, that will be a way around the software. So, you know.
Well, I mean, software is smart enough now to understand aggregation.
True.
My software could also look at the Word document and see if anything was in white print, anything was attached to the back end, to the front end, stenography, other things like that. So, you know, it's software the DoD uses throughout Ops and Intel, and also the 3-letter agencies. Why aren't you using it just to even check periodicals so you don't get a 3-day condor, you know, kind of thing going on, right?
And I have heard that writing non-fiction goes through a much more rigorous process than writing fiction. When you're writing fiction, it's kind of, they allow you to get away with it, not get away with a little bit more, but they're a little bit more kind of flexible with it. And at the same, I suppose because of the fact that, you know, it can be said, well, this is a fiction book. And I also heard, and again, don't quote me on this, but I heard if you worked, whether it's military or agency or any of the agencies, if you write for the one you worked for, it's much more strict than if you write. So if you worked for CIA but you write a character that's working for NSA or, you know, something like, then you can kind of, like I said, get away. No, I hate to say get away with a bit more, but they're a bit more lenient with what they allow to go through, shall we say?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, Don Bentley wrote, you know, his character was from DIA, you know, which is a good choice, and that kind of thing. My first book, I got a call, and out of the blue, this guy, as soon as I answer the phone, this guy goes, "Do you ever work at the CIA?" I'm like, "Really? What? Are you kidding me? You're asking me this? I don't even know who you are."
Yeah, first
I'm
question.
So, and he was with a company that does, in theory, he was with a company that I know does contracting and does certain things at that agency, and I'm like, you know, it just caught me off guard. I mean, I could just easily be truthful and say, no, I never worked there. You know, I'm not going to get in. I didn't get into who I'd worked with and what else I'd done, but I wasn't an employee. He's like, oh, okay. And then I found out later that my book got sent over there from the Lobster people. It's like, he's mentioning you guys, so you better check and make sure he's not breaking the secrecy agreement that he never signed. So but and now that you've mentioned nonfiction, like now you got me worried, because I've just written 4 historical fiction stories. Thank you very much, Gavin. Now I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Well, let's just pretend we never said that. I'll edit it out later. So, have you ever thought of writing down the route of nonfiction, like as in kind of I'm not even sure, but I did a book on lie detection, for example. I mean, have you ever thought of doing something along those lines?
Yeah, one of those technologies that I find a bit arcane and interesting is sound suppression at the end of a thing that goes bang. And so I actually have lots of pictures. When I was with the Secret Service, I took a day off and went over to the ATF gun library, and they've got like 3 of everything ever made in the world, right? And all kinds of good stuff. And so I thought about doing a book like that. But what I just really ended up getting excited about is I was at BoucherCon this year and got to talk with Mark Cameron. And he said, "Why aren't you writing Secret Service books? You're in the Secret Service." And I said, "Well, Butler, Pennsylvania, we're not a good rep right now." He's like, "Don't write about Butler." And so I've written these 4 short stories and tied them all the way back into 1319. Hardest story I've ever written in my life, because I would do like 30 minutes of research and write 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Research. I never want to write about medieval time again.
Oh, don't blame you.
Yeah. But now I've got that 1319 story, a 1963 November Dallas assassination attempt story, a 91. I was at U.S. Central Command. I had left the Secret Service and was at U.S. Central Command when the Queen came to knight Schwarzkopf in 91 after the Gulf War. And so I was there, and so I wrote a short story about that and threw in an Iraqi assassin. Why not? Right?
Yeah, of course.
The Iraqis were a little mad, And then
they don't get like that. They don't take offense, do they?
No. Saddam was okay. Passed the ice cream, no big deal. Yeah.
Oh, fair.
And then I wrote a 93. So, Stephen Hartov is a favorite author of mine who does nonfiction writing. Former paratrooper, Israeli Defense Forces and stuff. And so, it's interesting to hear you got an opportunity to write those short stories, because I found it really interesting to write short story. Mine aren't so short; they're 6,000 to 8,000 words. But the thing that surprised me about short stories is they still have a middle.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how difficult it was to write. The first time I had because there was a 3,000 word limit, and I thought, okay, 3,000 words, I can do something with that, So I started writing, and I was really super aware of the fact that I'd got this limit. So I was. How can I put it? I was bringing the pace really, really high, and I thought, right, let's see how many words I'm up to. And what I thought I'd done is probably about kind of 1,200 words in. And when I looked, I was about like kind of 300 and something words in. I thought, oh, okay, I've got loads, I've got tons to go. So I slowed the pace right down again and did the middle that we were talking about. And then when I did the middle, I thought to myself, right, let's see how many I've got left to go now. I should be somewhere in the region of kind of the kind of 1,500 mark or thereabouts, and maybe coming up. And I've got about 800 words left. I was like, oh. And have you ever seen that picture that is on the internet of a perfectly drawn pencil sketch of a horse at the back end, and then the front end is like a box with like 2 stick legs? Have you ever seen the one of and very much like the back end of the story was like that. It was a case of Yes, and then it all worked out fine in the end, and we all lived happily ever after. The editing that was involved in trying to fit within the 3,000 words was so difficult. And it reminded me of the famous quote, and I can't even remember who it was by. You might be able to tell me, where he said, "Forgive the length of the letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one."
Yeah, I don't remember who said that, but I get it. And you know, I just let myself write these stories. And there are some places where you can submit stories up to 8,000 words. But what the people when I was at Killer Nashville, I was really interested in the short story idea and went to those presentations and panels and things like that. And people have won who you know been in Alfred Hitchcock and all these different magazines and different things like this. One gentleman right here in Colorado Springs has got 170 short stories. He's a former DEA agent. That I just let myself write, and then I'm starting to go back now and edit. You know, now the story's done and things like that. So they'll come back a ways from 8,000. But yeah, 3,000 words, short, crisp, to the point, whole story arc, right? Whole evolved story and things like that. I'm just getting warmed up at 3,000.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I've got to admit, I was very inspired at the time as well, because I'd actually just read Amadei's origin story, which is just brilliant. I mean, it's just for a short story, it's just absolutely fantastic. He's straight into it, and it's just gripping from the very first page. And I remember thinking, that is what I like, the kind of challenge that I want to be able to looking at for this kind of 3,000. Because she said how difficult it was, and I'm like, okay, challenge accepted. Sleeves up, come on, let's do a 3,000. So yeah, you know, it really did kind of shock me when it came to trying to cram it into that 3,000 word spot and get the right balance of, like you say, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, I have I have the luxury of, my idea is more like do like 8 to 10 short stories and maybe put them out separately, but then combine them into a book, you know, kind of an anthology kind of idea, that kind of thing. But I am very interested in learning how to write that nice, tight, crisp, you know, it's like almost like, you know, a story in 6 words kind of idea, you know, thing, you know, and getting right to the point, you know, and the story. So
I mean, it is advantageous, but it does go against everything as writers that we know, where, you know, you're told constantly engage the 5 senses, constantly kind of, you know, be poetic with your descriptions and blah, blah, blah. And of course, in a short story, you don't want anything like that. You know, the room smelled damp, it was small, it was dark, and, you know, and it's very, like you say, very to the point with everything, that you kind of get to the story and leave the rest of the reader's imagination. It's good, I suppose, but
yeah, when I did my novella, you know, at novella, the upper limit of a novella is 40,000 words. When I got done with the Lance Beowulf origin story, I was at like 43, 44, you know, and I actually, I learned from a very, very good editor early on in my writing career how to be vicious when it comes to editing. And it's like, well, that's an interesting chapter, but don't need it. Poof.
He's got to go.
Yeah. There goes 1,200 words. Whoop, you know, and so that's actually sort of fun in a bizarre sort of, you know, way, is, you know, taking out the interesting but not, you know, not the really needed kind of pieces in the story. Because I have this sort of, I like telling stories, and so expanding the story and making it full, like you said, the 5 senses, all this stuff going on, maybe a little snippets of backstory, all that kind of thing. You know, that's just a different beast than what we're talking about. So
yeah, and that's something that really see. I struggle with things, not so much like flashbacks. I very seldom put flashbacks in. What I tend to do is an actual, like, 3 months earlier, and, you know, so you'll start the story off 3 months earlier, and then the story will then bring you up to that point where you know. So I'll do that, but memories and flashbacks can be quite difficult to write if you don't get it very, very. It has to be spot on, otherwise it starts confusing the reader. And it was an area that I thought, do I really want to go down that route? So I need to start being a bit more like that and kind of learning how to write in, like, this brought back a memory from when he was a child, and without going down the route of making it the reader like kind of, I don't want to know, I'm not interested.
Yeah, my editor that I used for this 4th book, Caribbean Harvest, comes out in January. There was a spot where he's like, where does this thing come into play? And I told him the backstory of the thing, and he's like, well, why don't you write that into the prologue? And I'm like, wow, I've never done it. Are prologues are dead or alive? Are they good, the bad? So actually, it's my 4th Shadow Tier book, and it's the first time I've done a prologue and an epilogue.
Oh, wow.
But of course, the epilogue now I'm able to tie into what will be. I've already got a short story that follows it up, and then goes into the 5th or 6th book, whichever one it is. That it'll be. It's easy to say that the next book in that series is going to concern fentanyl, Chinese, still be involved in Mexico and the ports of entry for all the fentanyl kind of stuff. But
yeah,
it's really, it was an interesting thing to do, because I've read so many good authors that have had prologues, like they just something out of the blue, and something happens, and then it doesn't come back around until chapter 12 or 30 or something like that.
Yeah. I do like that concept myself, and of course, you do have that advantage of not having to write a flashback or write this into the actual story and then somehow fill that gap. So yeah, definitely. The only thing I did write originally the first draft of my first fiction book. I had an epilogue in that. And the editor scrapped it, said you don't need it. Total waste of time. I'm like, oh, I kind of liked it, but okay, I'll trust your judgment, which I probably shouldn't have done. And it was kind of handy anyway, because if I had, it would have screwed up the way I had to rewrite part 2. So it was useful that it happened in hindsight. But what I've started doing now with part 2, I've put the first 2 or 3 chapters of part 3. And so, and I found a lot of authors are doing that now. If they're doing a series like what you're doing, they'll re-release the books, and they'll put the first chapter to 2 or 3 chapters at the end of, like book 2 goes into book 1 and book 3 goes into book 2, and to kind of get the reader engaged in and wanting to get the next one already. And it was useful for me, because I remember wanting to end book 2 on a cliffhanger, and I did in the first draft, and I said to the editor, no, you can't do that. You can't. There has to be a happy ending, and then you start book 3 afresh. And I said, what if I put the first 3 chapters of book 3 in at the end? And she said, okay, yeah, you can. I was like, okay, that'll do. So that was a happy middle ground for me.
Well, it's interesting because one of my favorite writers, Stephen Connolly, I go back and listen to a series of his, and the book just stops, literally stops, and then the next book picks up with the action, and but once again, it's from 6-8 years ago or something like that, when I guess that was an accepted practice. So
yeah, and you say accepted practice, but I think it was just because there wasn't the same rules back then. There wasn't like a kind of general way, like an accepted way of doing things. It was just kind of, you did what you did. If people liked it, they published it, and people bought it and read it, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, I think it was probably after the late 90s, early noughties, all of a sudden, all the publishing houses said, no, we want this format that everybody's got to stick to. And I think that's when, I think I was saying, every kind of layout become very samey for the majority of writers, and that same kind of, format that they're all using. And that's why I broke all the rules with mine and self-published.
Well, that's the nice thing. So back in January, my end of December, my publisher for the Shadow Tier series went out of business, and very graciously gave me all the rights, gave me everything. So I quickly had to learn Amazon, republish second editions, do all that kind of stuff. but since that time, then, it's like, I'm actually Pratt and Media is the publisher. My pub is me, my wife and I. And so, yeah, I can use whatever convention I want, as long as, based on, reader feedback. And the beta reader feedback has been good.
Yeah.
And the number one thing I've done is open up. So when you read ST4, it's going to read like you and a bunch of your knucklehead friends that are getting after it, right? Serious business, but joking and smoking, that whole kind of, when you're in a tight military unit and you're just getting after it. A lot of people a lot of people, civvies on the outside, look at it and go, how are these, these knuckleheads,
Yeah, that's again, you've paralleled what I've written in my book with the whole kind of people love the humor, and the ex-military people and the ex-service guys and the ex-intelligence guys, they get the humor because they've been in those situations. I do have one or two people raise their eyebrows and go, "Would you really do that in that situation?" You're like, "Yes, actually, you would." So it's good in that sense, because again, I've had this come back from editors saying, "Oh, you wouldn't really do that. And you wouldn't really do that." And I'm like, have you ever been in a firefight? Have you ever been in a hostile environment? Have you ever been in this particular country? They go, no. And I say, okay, then, well, trust me, you do, and you would, and you will. So
well, that's interesting that you say that, because I've had that this year, some, and I appreciate the feedback I get from this person, but she's just not been in that environment. She doesn't know, and her knowledge of the environment is actually from other fiction writers. So that doesn't exactly make it, 100% wrong or 100% right. But I still like getting her feedback, because it's a check. Was I goofing? Is it too far out there? Would anybody believe that I drove a round parachute into my friend's parachute just so I could pull his reserve and make it drift away? No, but I can say that I did.
Does it happen?
Way
Yes.
at the other end of Fort Bragg when he finally touched down. So, yeah. So,
but and again, this is what people do, especially military guys, when and in certain situations, that are very, very tense. Sometimes it's what kind of gets you through, as it were, and like you say, the amount of goofing around that's done, not just in training but on the field, it's surprising, and this is probably, and what we're writing is entertainment. At the end of the day, we're not writing. Well, you might be writing history, but what we're writing from the for the reader, the majority of the time, is entertainment. So not everything in there is exactly how everything. I'm making a gash of this. I'm making a royal disaster of this. But it's not all going to be exactly how things are done the majority of the time. I've tried to keep it as as correct as I can with the tradecraft. But in all honesty, the majority of the things that we're doing, it's a TV show. And if this was going on in real life everywhere, every day, then we'd be living in a very messed up world.
Right. Yeah. It even in my historical fiction, I say, like Stephen does, that I've got real people, historical events, but I'm adding fictional elements to it. So, the fact that the Queen did show up and Knight Schwarzkopf did happen. I had her stay in a hangar, and Schwarzkopf moved it up because it was too hot to be outside. Different things that didn't happen. Luckily there was nobody in a boat with 81, 83, 81, anyway, a mortar that was launching, going to launch rounds on the ceremony and things like that. So,
but it's good when people can kind of say, when it raises the question, did that actually happen? Is this something that, because there's probably a million conspiracy theorists around the world somewhere going, I bet that really happened, and they keep that from us and it's locked in a government vault or whatever.
My wife's like, are you sure you want to write about November 23rd, 1963, the day President Kennedy died? And I'm like, oh yeah. Not not to belittle the Secret Service or anything, but to tell a different version of the story.
Mhm.
And anyway, so I was in the Secret Service. I know what they go through. I'm not going to belittle them or just make stuff up to make me look good and them bad. So anyway, it's short stories, historical fiction, changing up what I'm doing. I don't know about you, but it's really been, I think, helpful for my craft because I have to think about things differently and how I'm going to present them and stuff. But still keep the story interesting and not turn it into a history book that's just
Yeah.
eating what everybody can find on Google. So
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, the advice when I was probably 3 books in, 4 books in, maybe a little bit more, I remember somebody saying to me, don't write complicated plots. Write simple plots with complicated characters. I thought, oh, I like that. And it's so true, so effective and so true.
yeah, my second book, man, I had Lance fighting off the cartel up in the Crow Reservation. I had the president telling him he had to stop the flow of opium out of Afghanistan. So, and then I threw in Marseille and the French Connection, using Cosa, and everybody was like, "Wow, that book was crazy." It came together, but and it's like, yeah, that was painful to write too. So, in Caribbean Harvest, Lance chases after El Chapo in Cuba because he's afraid Cuba could become the next Afghanistan. Simple.
Yeah.
Simple. And then so much more focus on characters than, guys driving opium across Iran, and the IRGC and everybody else. So, yeah. Great advice. Wish I'd done that sooner.
Yeah, it's definitely something for me that I kind of learned the hard way. I did a book called Questionable Tactics, which is way away from like my usual kind of spy fiction novels. It's more of your Hollywood flash and bang kind of fiction, and that was what I decided to do with that. Is just one antagonist, one protagonist. It's a bit of an anti-hero, but that. He's just good guy, bad guy. He has to get him. That's it. I thought if I overcomplicate it, and there was lots of good stuff in it. The guy's mechanism of how he was, the reason behind the crime and everything else. And it was really, really getting the reader to question, well, hang on, is the bad guy here actually that bad? Even though what he's doing is not a great way of doing it, and is the good guy really that good? And are they in the right? Or so there was a lot of grey areas, which is brilliant. The only thing I did do, he had a delivery system for a specific poison for the majority of the population of the world, and I'd written it into the book. And then this whole COVID thing happened, and then I was like, and then this delivery system, and then I thought, I'm not putting that in the book. I took it all back out again. I had to gloss over it a little bit because, there was in fact, I'm not even going to talk about it now. So what's next on your list of writings? Because you said you got a book coming in January, and is there anything planned for after that as well?
Yeah. So this is Caribbean Harvest, which comes out in January. Like I said, Lance and Ellie find out that El Chapo is in Cuba, and Lance's obsession gets the better of him, and they have to go, right? They have to go find out what's going on, make sure, like say, that all of a sudden the tobacco and the other products are the mainstreams of Cuba, not opium. And I've been working on those short stories. So I'm still undecided whether I'm going to, parse those out, once every quarter or something like that, then put it together as a book. But that's fun to do. And then really interesting thing came up. The military has been talking about a method of storytelling called useful fiction. Do you remember Ghost Fleet, the book?
No.
Yeah. So these gentlemen, it's a Third World War story, and instead of doing what we love to do in the military is, 113 PowerPoint slides, or some just pure text, blah, 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 about this is what's going to happen. They wrote this white paper, essentially became a novel, and called Ghost Fleet. And it's these vignettes, these little short stories of different people and the impacts of, in this case, what the Chinese are doing to, because they want Taiwan, they don't want to invade America, that kind of thing. And so they were using, it was near future technology, so things that could very well be possible. And so I actually have an organization, a commercial company, defense contractor, that would like me to write some short stories, write a story arc, some short stories that they would then publish, put together, about a certain technology that can be talked about and things like that at a certain, at a level. So it's interesting that now that I'm retired from the defense industry, that somebody wants me to come back and actually, instead of do what we call a use case, like as an Intel analyst, you're going to click on this and you're going to, get this kind of data, then write a story with, Admiral Nicky Fury, who, is a PACOM commander, things like that. So pretty interesting stuff. And it's sort of an interesting departure, but still right down the lane of, writing fictional stories that somebody would want to read.
Yeah, you got my mouth watering already, because again, so many things come to mind about the technology side, and as you can imagine, I have to be careful what I put in the books, and I'm sure you've probably had the same thing where once upon a time you've probably been writing and you put something in and thought, should I really put that in? Should I, and you've probably done what I've done, taken it out and just thought, no, I better not talk about that or mention that, and it's not just about like yourself getting into trouble. It's just, so I have an ethical guideline that I use. For example, I teach a lot of tradecraft in the book. It's written in a very specific way. The book is, it's unusual to most spy fiction. You've got the story, and then every so often there'll be a little panel and it'll say tradecraft, and it'll tell you exactly what's done and how it's done, why it's done that way and not another way, and blah, blah, blah. And then it'll carry on with the story. And the reason I did it is because I've picked up books in the past, and a fiction book that I've started to get into, but then it's gone into terminology and all, and I've not got a clue what, it's a specialist thing, and I don't know what the story's all about. By the time I'm 3-4 chapters in, I'm lost. It's just acronyms, and I thought I didn't want to do that. So I've put not glossary. What do they call it? A terminology. In the book at the beginning, because again, it's usually at the back. And that's usually when you finish reading the book, and then you spot it and go, if I'd known that, I didn't use that earlier. So I did
that sooner. Yeah.
Exactly. So I put it at the front. So I'll put the tradecraft things in, the sections in. And like I say, you can read it as a fiction novel. If you're a seasoned spy-fi reader and you know the tradecraft, or you're in the game, or you're a former intelligence or whatever, you can skip those and just read it as a story. If you're new or you don't know, you've got those tradecraft sections that you can read, to kind of bring you up to speed, as it were, or you can just read it as a field manual if you wanted to. So that's why I did it that way. But the only thing I decided before, I don't mind revealing the tradecraft, but I thought, no way am I going to put the instructions in on how to make explosives. There's no reason why anyone, within the public domain that I can think of, no good reason why they would need to make an IED. So I thought, I'm not going to put that in there. I'll put the other stuff in there. I'll put as much tradecraft as I can possibly put in there, but not no reason for them to kind of learn to make IEDs. I'm sure you've probably had very similar things, whether it's kind of how to access systems or the security measures of or what. I've got to be careful what I say, even just talking. But I'm sure you've probably started writing it and gone, yeah, this is the way. And then you've gone, oh, no, I better back up.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, there are things that we used to term cyber bullets, of various calibers and various capabilities and things like that. And so, yeah, just, I have to dumb it down and say, that they passed a payload, things like that. And I did in Caribbean Harvest, I did talk a little bit about the fact that magnesium burns really bright. You can see it from space, kind of idea. But I also have a bioweapons story, and I did a lot of research, and I make things up, and but I'm not putting in chemical properties and or the chemistry of what happens. I just sort of make things up, and luckily Lance gets in the way, so it never works, kind of idea. But it's I think what happens is it slows the reader down when you get so technical. I love what you did, because like you say, it's got a panel, I can hop over it or go, yeah, oh yeah, that's right here. In my case, I could catch up on some of the things that, I've forgotten or didn't even know. But you've got a choice to do that. It's not buried in. It's like, reading a book where, somebody's talking about, making a nuclear device, and then you read about it and you spend all that time and you go, that doesn't work. It's like, it just makes me mad. I tossed the book at that point.
And of course, I mean, you can't take it away from Jack Carr, but you've got to admit that sometimes when you're reading some of his books, and they'll say, he pulled the Glock 19 9mm 10-round kind of extended magazine, blah blah blah, from the F pancake holster that was a specific nylon of it, and it goes on about everything from like the rounds of ammunition he's using and the type of weapon, and before you long, I just want to get to the bit where he's about to shoot the bad guy. So that's deliberately why I did those sections, so you can go, if I want to know the specifics, I'll go back and have a look in a minute. I'm enjoying the story.
Well, I've taken Brad Taylor's idea that, one time I'm like, Lance likes SIG pistols. Great. He was very much a Browning high power guy, but I was.
I think that was my first ever pistol was a Browning HP.
That's right. After that, Lance pulls his pistol or pulls his knife. I might mention it one time, but I'm not going to mention the fact that he's got a Randall Model 14 in stainless, 7-inch blade knife every time.
Now, and of course, it's not so bad if it's like you say, you can talk about it on the first time, but excuse me, sometimes people will go to extremes of if they've got like a particular rifle, and they'll go and it got this particular scope and a such and such barrel and a such and such stock, and I say and you just think by the time you're 3 pages in, you got a better picture of the bloody rifle of what you have than the story, so.
Right. Yeah. You can overdo it. Sometimes it's fun to throw that stuff in. Sometimes, but I pair it. Well, I don't even throw it in anymore. Really, I sort of started that way, but because I was a guns guy, so still I'm a guns guy. But
me too. As you can see, well, all right. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm aware of the fact that we've passed the hour and we've kind of talked about all sorts of things and skirted around some things that we probably shouldn't talk about. We'll do when we finish recording, maybe in a bit. So your website, Steve Stratton USA, is that right? SteveStrattonUSA.com. Stephen.
StrattonUSA.com. Yep, you can find everything there. Caribbean Harvest is on pre-order, so it's available. We're in our process of ARCs, advanced reader copies, if you'd like to sign up and win a chance to get an ARC. So that's ongoing. So love to have people join, and you can get a free book and give me some feedback. I'd love to get it. I love to hear feedback from readers, and to include the fact I can't spell, whatever it might be, or I missed something. So it's all good.
Yeah. Is it $10 for the first person? That's possibly the only mistake in the book.
Well, there's coin patches and some other things going on. I'm also got signed copies of books from my favorite authors like Jack Stewart Mark Greaney, Brad Taylor, that I give away, things like that to spread the love. And yeah, I need to get a couple of your books, get them signed so I can do that too.
Oh, I can do that for sure. In fact, I might personally hand deliver them over to Denver to you, and it gives me an excuse to come up to the cabins there and enjoy a bit of time away.
We're going to need some chains. It's snowing like crazy right now. So.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet, yeah. So one last thing before we finish recording, your charity that you've got on your website, can we give them a plug? Because I think it's a worthwhile cause.
Yeah, Special Operations Warrior Foundation. They do a great job helping the survivors of lost service members and their children getting the opportunity to get to college, and a few other things like that. But it's a great charity. You can actually sign up so that when you buy through Amazon, they get a percentage of the sales. And if you buy a signed copy from me of a book, then $5 of that sale goes to the charity. So
fantastic.
Yeah, very, very worthwhile.
That's brilliant. So yes, please check that out. I'm well behind that myself, and I'm going to look into possibly emulating your model there with that, Steve. So right then, thanks very much. I'm going to hit the end button. Thank you for everybody for joining us. Please hit the like and subscribe if you like this, and check out the other videos.